Okay, welcome everyone. Good morning and a very warm welcome to this session on equitable and inclusive research partnerships. Before we start, let's acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, whose lands we gather upon. Let's pay our respect to the tens of thousands of years of learning and knowledge exchange that has taken place and celebrate the survival of the oldest living culture in the world. I have the pleasure of handing over to Karen, who needs very little introduction to introduce the team today. As you know, Karen is the Associate Professor at the Institute for Sustainable Futures and Chair of the RDI Board. So please join me in welcoming Karen and the panel.
Great, thanks. So Tamara's going to come on up with me. Welcome, everyone. I'm moderating this panel, so I'm just going to ask the questions and facilitate a conversation with a great group of people that we have here today. Online, we have, and above me, we have Pinkan Umba, who is the head of Partnership Management with KONEKSI, and you'll find out more what this KONEKSI is. Pinkan's going to tell us all about that. Marilyn Mehta, who is the head of Partnership Strategy and GEDSI, Gender Equality, Disability and Social Inclusion. Stuart Norup, who is the head of Planning, Performance and Learning with KONEKSI. Myself, and Tamara McGaw, who's with me here, who's the Senior Research Consultant at the Institute for Sustainable Futures at the University of Technology, Sydney. So welcome to you all. Maybe I'll just give a shout out to Marilyn, Stuart and Pinkan. Did you want to say a brief hello to the audience before we get started, just to make sure your mics work and it's all good?
Hi, Marilyn here.
Hi everyone, Stuart Norup here.
Everyone, this is Pinkan. I hope you can hear us well.
Great, we can hear you loud and clearly. Perfect. Excellent. So I'd like to start with you, Pinkan. I'd be interested to, if you could just tell us briefly what KONEKSI is, because some people know about it, but a lot of people in the room don't know about this thing called KONEKSI. So you describe it to us. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. So KONEKSI is a bilateral knowledge partnership platform between Australia and Indonesia. It's supported by the Indonesian government and funded by the Australian government. So the platform supports strategic collaborations that generate knowledge to inform inclusive and sustainable policy and technology. We work across sectors: climate, digital transformation, energy, and more, to connect people and institutions from universities, research institutions, government bodies, the private sectors, and development actors from both countries. But it is not just about producing research, it's about what research enables: credible policy advice, inclusive innovation, stronger institutions, and a more resilient Australia-Indonesia relationship. So our goal is to build lasting institutional ties that support shared national interests, including inclusive and sustainable growth, regional stability, and long-term cooperation. So that's about KONEKSI here.
Great. Thanks so much, Pinkan. So Pinkan, you wrote the abstract for this session. Why did you want to have this conversation focused on equitable and inclusive research partnerships? And why did you want to reflect on knowledge partnerships as part of this work that you're doing?
Yeah, okay. So we chose this topic because in research partnership, how people work together matters just as much as what they produce. Yeah, that's the core of this talk. Yeah, equitable and inclusive partnerships are key to ensuring research is not only impactful but also credible, relevant, and grounded in local contexts. So, in our experience, the strongest collaboration happen when all partners are engaged as peers, bringing different strengths, values, and perspectives. But there's also a strategic reason. So genuine partnerships strengthen system. They build mutual trust, enhance institutional capability, and lay solid foundation for ongoing cooperation in research policy and diplomacy. So for KONEKSI, this is what we want to reflect, where long-term value is created, not just in producing knowledge, but in supporting enduring cooperation and influence that extends beyond the life of a project. We want to share this.
That's great. So
Thanks.
can you explain a little bit why Tamara is with us today and the relationship between ISF and KONEKSI in terms of the case studies?
Yeah, so Tamara is one of the consultant we engage as part of the ISF to support the development of case studies where we want to learn about the partnership and the GEDSI experience from the 30 from some of the knowledge research projects we supported. And I think Tamara's here would like to share that experience.
Great, great. Well, we'll hear from Tamara later in terms of these case studies. Marilyn, I'm interested to hear from you about what your perspective around GEDSI. And we know that considerations for GEDSI is a priority for KONEKSI. What did you learn from the case studies which explored GEDSI? What did you learn from those case studies in terms of the work that KONEKSI is doing and the work that various research projects are doing within the sort of umbrella of KONEKSI?
Thank you, Karen, and good evening, everyone. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think the case studies provided us with so many different amazing insights, and so I think I'll just highlight a few of them here. I think the first really is how, as what Finkel has already sort of alluded to, I think the partnership and GEDSI are so intertwined. In terms of, we know that strong, sustainable, collaborative partnership really rely on a really sort of solid foundational understanding, and awareness of the importance of GEDSI in research. And I think a real genuine commitment to addressing GEDSI in practice in all aspects of the different aspects of research. I think, I wonder whether it's useful for us to just pause here and unpack GEDSI principle and the whole notion of inclusivity here, because it's terms that are thrown around a lot. But I think from KONEKSI's perspective, I think pretty much shared with a lot of our colleagues, is fundamentally an awareness and willingness to challenge some of the inherent power relation and structures of inequality that exist in all levels of research practice. And I think this is precisely why KONEKSI puts such a big emphasis on partnership, but also having very diverse perspectives, experiences, and representation in the different aspects of research is so important. I think that leads to the second insight that I wanted to sort of reflect on is, I think, the importance of leadership and culture in the research team and in the research partnership in driving GEDSI integration in research. And I think the case study absolutely confirms for us that strong, sustainable GEDSI integration is made possible by inclusive ways of working together. And I think this is very much led by inclusive leadership and partnership that I think creates the environment, encourages this very diverse perspectives and contributions. And what we also learned through our experience, but also from the case studies, that research teams that are equipped and proactive, I guess, in addressing some of the challenges that comes up within the research teams and in their collaborative partnerships, and the partners that are open to navigating and managing different perspectives and acknowledging the gaps in their GEDSI expertise, and either actively seeking support from KONEKSI or getting additional GEDSI expertise in a team. That's the sort of the really important insight for us. And I think that leads to the third insight, which is really from KONEKSI's perspective, providing accessible GEDSI support and resources to our knowledge partners. And for KONEKSI, it's important that GEDSI is not just a tokenistic or a box-ticking exercise. It's And we also, I guess, at the same time, appreciate that not all researchers have the expertise in GEDSI integration. And I think that's why we set up a whole range of GEDSI support within the KONEKSI team through training modules, GEDSI resources and guidance. And I think that the point that I think we want to make is that GEDSI integration in research is very much a work in progress. And we see that for ourselves as well as for our knowledge partners. And that means that the GEDSI resources that we create and develop needs to be adaptive and continuously respond to the needs of our very diverse knowledge partners through the many rounds that Binkan already shared with us: environmental, climate change, digital transformation. They're all tackling very, very different issues. So which is why the GEDSI teams set aside some time and redevelop our GEDSI markers that sort of really foregrounds a much more intersectional approach to research. And I think there's still a tendency to see GEDSI groups as discrete and separate, whereas we know that we don't live single issue lives. They're often intersections of issues that we tackle with and research teams too. So I'll leave that there. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. Tamara and I are looking down here because there's a screen with Pinkan, Stuart and Marilyn's face. So if you think we're like looking just down at the floor, be assured we're actually looking at their faces, which you're seeing up there. Also to note, just to encourage you for Q&A, we'll be using the WOVA app again. So if you do have any questions that come to mind as we're going along, please post them in your WOVA app. Stuart, over to you, and I'd be interested to hear about your perspective on partnership. We've been talking about partnership. We talk about partnership a lot in international development, and KONEKSI has a strong focus on partnership as an outcome of the research, which I think is an interesting concept in itself, and not just as a means to create research findings. Yeah, what did you learn about partnership from the case studies? And yeah, I'd really interested to hear you unpacking this concept partnership.
Thanks very much, Karen, for the question, and hi again, everyone. Great to be with you. The case studies were fascinating for me because here in KONEKSI, we deal with a large portfolio of research projects. In this particular round of environment and climate change, there were 38 partnerships. And as you may have read in the session introduction, there was around 111 organizations. So a huge scale of collaboration here. But these case studies were designed to really dig deep, really sort of as you said, Karen, unpack what was the experience of the researchers inside these partnerships. What were the dynamics of those partnerships? And so it was really fascinating to get that depth through these case studies. And there were quite a few interesting issues that were highlighted through them. One in particular, if I can perhaps just highlight this, was how critical diverse types of organisation and diverse types of researchers, that really came through very strongly in this set of case studies. There was one partnership, for example, that involved local organisations. So it was focused on the impacts of climate change on livelihoods in different rural areas of Indonesia. And this one partnership brought together local NGOs. They had deep roots in those communities in that particular place. They really knew the families, the individuals who were impacted by these changes on their livelihoods. But they've been struggling for years to bring these issues to the attention of local governments. And it wasn't an easy struggle for them. But through KONEKSI, it actually this KONEKSI research grant, it actually connected them with local university academics. So again, like these academics had a very different background. They didn't have the connection to the communities, but they had the experience with applied social analysis tools. But interestingly, these academics, these researchers in the local university, had also very strong connections with local government, and so they brought this to the mix. But then you also had an Australian partner in this particular consortium, this particular partnership that brought some new tools that just extended that analysis a bit more. And so what we saw in this case, which was repeated in many other cases, was just the power of that diversity, because they brought that set of that really local connectedness, the connection to local policymakers, and this additional rigor that actually, for the first time, generated a bit of momentum in government. It got people's attention. And it actually went a little bit further than that in this particular case. There's actually been some particular follow-up inside government. But that particular example just highlights something that we've seen in other cases, and we've now kind of looked for a bit more across the portfolio, and that is that diversity. When you have that sort of those different organizational backgrounds, and the researchers themselves bring different experiences and different sets of expertise. That's the magic, I guess, for me. And these case studies really highlighted that. So perhaps if I can just really focus on that one. Thanks, Karen. I'll leave it there for now.
Great. We've got the word magic now added into our mix. In addition to some of the words from this morning. Pinkan, what for you was the key insight about partnership that you've appreciated most from your work with KONEKSI and learnings through these case studies?
One key insight I appreciated is that when partnerships and inclusivity are designed intentionally, the values extend far beyond the research outputs. So the case study, like Mas Stuart mentioned, shows that multidisciplinary and diverse institutional partnerships, and like what Murmalan also mentioned, that supported by frameworks, setting of shared goals, leads to better collaboration and therefore more policy relevant and stronger institutional capabilities. So I saw this partnership as a mechanism for continuity of engagement.
What do you mean by continuity of engagement? What does that mean for you?
Yeah, because I see that when researchers, when these people collaborate as equals and institutions grow together because they work together to achieve shared goals, in the future, it becomes easier to navigate further cooperation, on climate policy, digital transformation, or anything, any sectors, in any sectors. And that's where the long-term impact lies. Not just in the knowledge produced, but what the process enables, what the knowledge enables, credible influence, resilient system, and meaningful relationship, and leads to meaningful bilateral relationship.
It's great, which sort of speaks to the point this morning around the difference between a transactional approach and a relational approach that our keynote spoke about this morning. Tamara, so you were one of the researchers in this case study. And we talked earlier about GEDSI and the consideration of GEDSI in research. What did you learn about GEDSI from the case studies?
Thank you. Well, I want to just start with situating my knowledge for transparency, that I was also a partner in the first KONEKSI round as a Australian researcher with an Indonesian organisation in the lead, which was really enjoyable and challenging and gave me good background before I began this case study project as well. So for this case studies, we interviewed the lead researchers of both Australian and Indonesian organisations and some of their partners. So what kind of teams are we talking about? There's the consultants, there's Indonesian government, sometimes academics that are based in Indonesia. There's Indonesian academics who are based in Australian institutions that have connections back to Indonesia. There's civil society organizations that were part of participatory research. And we also had Australian academics with some connection with Indonesia, like myself, who had already learned the language. And so it was quite incredible to see sort of the diversity of teams that Stuart was talking about. Now, to respond specifically to GEDSI, some of the reflections that I had were that GEDSI doesn't really happen by default. It's actually a radical idea, and it needs to be built into the research team structure and processes from the start. So it requires intentional design. And that means that projects that succeeded had clear GEDSI goals and approaches from the start. When GEDSI was treated like a side issue, it can become tokenistic, or GEDSI aspects struggle to gain traction. And what we saw in the case studies was that there was a good level of understanding of gender equality and transformation, and disability inclusion is still developing both for the Australian knowledge sector and the Indonesian knowledge sector. Also, the leadership and the team composition are critical. So gender balanced teams and support for early and mid-career women researchers led to stronger team dynamics. There's also a focus in KONEKSI on capacity building of researchers from Eastern Indonesia. And I know there's been some in-person trainings and some conferences specifically focused on that, which is really important. In one case, by UQ, leading female researchers were given leadership roles in a traditionally male-dominated sector, agribusiness, and this was a deliberate strategy. We found that there was not a strong representation of people with disabilities in the research teams, and that reflects the broader challenges of disability inclusion in work. And the gains that happened in GEDSI didn't just rely on individual champions, but there were some strong leaders and passion to make the big changes happen. And it could be broadened into institutional systems that support GEDSI. Just to reiterate the point that diverse partnerships strengthens GEDSI practice. So collaborations between academics and civil society organizations really enriched the research and grounded it in lived experience. So for example, there was a project that showed how grassroots women activist networks involved in a participatory action research methodology brought deep contextual knowledge to climate change that academics alone couldn't access. And these partnerships also help to bridge power gaps, but they require time and trust to work well. And this is often not fully funded within the 1-year research period of KONEKSI. It can take years to develop and years to also see the full outcomes of those collaborations. Engagement and government ministries were part of the efforts to raise awareness and influence policy on gender and climate adaptation. So, for example, the Ministry of Women's Empowerment in Indonesia is one of those stakeholders. And just a final point that GEDSI is a continuous practice. It's not a once-off task. So that teams that had created space for reflection, for mentorship and shared learning were better able to adapt and grow. It wasn't just another thing to tick off on the list of their project plan. So without ongoing support and institutional commitment, GEDSI can risk becoming dependent on individuals, which isn't sustainable, really integrating it into how we work together and build partnerships, not just about who or what we research.
Great, thank you. We've got a lot of time for Q&A. I can see that people aren't using in the WOVA. So I'll ask Marjorie to take the mic. And if there's any questions, we'll take questions from the room. and yeah, have a bit of a conversation with Marilyn, Stewart and Pinkan in Jakarta. Teleport to Jakarta. Any questions?
We do have a question or a comment on the app.
Okay.
So someone's mentioned, is it worth noting the partnership with Development in Practice and a special issue coming out early next year? So would anyone like to comment on that?
Yes.
And we'll just take another one as well.
Yep.
Yes, I'm Patrick Kilby, the Editor-in-Chief of Development in Practice, the said journal. I'd like to thank Pinkan very much for the support, and also apologies from Emily, who is our managing editor, who has steered the process, and also Rochelle Spencer in West Australia, who started it off. It was more than a year ago now. 18 months ago. So I think that's important. But the partnership is fantastic from my point of view, because A, it is a partnership, and B, we had, I think it was about a dozen mentors, I think, and 20 mentees or something. I'm not good on numbers, but that just gives you an idea. And as a result, we have a special issue of Development in Practice. And it's worth noting that it will be the first special issue of Development in Practice led from the Global South. We got a dozen special issues in various stages of production, but they're usually led by scholars from the Global North. So that's a big yes. We have 8 papers so far. I've just texted Emily, but she's probably caught up in something to get the latest update. I think there's probably another couple. We don't need, we can always juggle, but a dozen or so papers for a special issue, but we'll get there. And as a result, I think, of KONEKSI and word of mouth, we're now getting so many more submissions from Indonesia. It has really taken off in the last year. Which is fantastic, because when we started 4 years ago, 5 years ago, Indonesia wasn't on the radar. It was all India, South Asia, Ghana, and then broadly West Africa. Now the submissions are really spread out, and it's fantastic that Indonesia is right up there. But it's been a great partnership, and just a little nudge to Pinkan. We'd be very happy to have another round of it if possible in the forthcoming year, because it's great.
Any reflections from the panel on that comment, and any questions from the room?
Maybe just, sorry, Stuart here, Kieran. If I may just jump in to thank you, Patrick, for your words. I mean, it's been a fantastic exercise to observe from a distance. I haven't been closely involved in the mentorship, but I have, in my role here in KONEKSI, needed to write that up and communicate some of the results of that. And it's been fantastic, particularly to read and hear about the experience of the mentees and the mentors, how much personal enjoyment and enrichment they've felt from the Development in Practice support. So just really to acknowledge that and express my appreciation as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. We've just got a question.
Just to the panel, I was just wondering around if the concept of fair comes up in conversation at all, the fairness of partnerships and how, groups, individuals want to tackle that conversation as what's fair to me compared to what fair is in other people's eyes. So, any thoughts on that line around fairness?
Anyone want to take that in particular?
I can start doing just reflecting, I think it's just really, thank you for the question. Very, very good question. I think we often sort of get back to basic to, you know, like understanding that we live in an unequal world where there is so many structures and systems of inequality. And I think to even begin to contemplate that question around fairness, I think we, as researchers, we have to really ask ourselves, you know, position ourselves in that sort of spectrum of privilege and disadvantage, and we all sit alongside that spectrum, and it's so relational and it's so contextual. And I think that's one approach that we, that the GEDSI team at KONEKSI is trying to, I guess, start that conversation around being able to position ourselves, particularly in international research collaboration, where within each research team, there is so many different levels of power relation and power difference, and how to navigate that. And to, I think, not be afraid of it, because I think that's an unavoidable thing. And I think this goes back to the point that we try to make about GEDSI, is that it is unavoidable. It doesn't matter whether your research is GEDSI focused or not. The thing is that whatever your research focus is and where your research is being carried out, every community will have groups, a community that are marginalized intersectionally, and to not address that, will not be aware of that, is likely to contribute and reinforce the kind of barriers and inequality or unfairness. So I think it is a question that we encourage our knowledge partners and ourselves to really reflect on. And I hope that sort of goes some way to respond to your question around fairness. And it's a constant negotiation. And I think what we try to do, KONEKSI, is to create a space where we can have robust and honest conversations about that. And questions around unfairness do come up, and that's very, very common and to be expected in sort of complex, diverse partnerships. I'll hand over to you and Pinkan to.
Yeah, thank you, Marilyn. I'll go next if that's okay, and then hand back to Pinkan. Yeah, so I think, yeah, that was very eloquent, talking about that kind of, yeah, inherent inequalities that happen all the time, and the importance of having conversations about them. It can be really challenging to talk about it directly, especially in new partnerships where we don't know people that well, but really creating those relationships. And I think that through this type of research partnership, a lot of diverse partners were able to meet together, both in person and online, and build those relationships. And I think as well, looking at the educational sector, in Indonesia, the higher education sector, it's often the bigger, more well-funded universities that were having international collaborations, like UI and UGM. But then what this KONEKSI did was spread those collaborations or support institutional collaborations across a much broader number of higher educational institutions. So increasing the opportunities for researchers in those areas in Eastern Indonesia, but also in different types of disciplines beyond the usual suspects. And that really just raises more awareness of that importance of international partnership, and that it's not capacity building in one direction, but it's actually like quite mutual, in the sense of people wanting to learn new skills, wanting to learn about new contexts, wanting to teach others the expertise they have, and in return learning about something else that they don't know about, and having that humbleness, I think, to all come together and share what we don't know yet, what we do know, what we're confused about. Yeah, hand it back to you.
I'll just jump in before you go, Pinkan, but I recall one of the case studies, the topic came up around the partnership and fairness. One's I thought comes to mind was around the transparency of funding. And so often within research partners and international development, people don't know what funds the other ones have. And one of the partners that I recall, they had a transparent, open access information about how much money was going to each of the partners. And I recall one of the interviewees recognised that, yes, they have more money because they're more expensive and they're actually doing this role and this role, and we have this amount of money, and that amount of money is enough that we need. And so they felt it was fair because they were resourced to do their job within the context of what they were doing. It wasn't like everyone should have equal amount of funding, but we've all got enough to do our jobs well. And I thought that was a really interesting kind of perspective. And I think it's a way that we should be acting more and more and more about that transparency of funding. Who's got the money? Because, a lot of these international projects, international research projects or international projects, they're big budgets, but who's actually getting the funding? And so having that transparency and that accountability, I think, is a really important part of that fairness and setting that up. Pinkan, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, thank you, Karen. So we actually learned a lot from the case study because the case study was based on the first pilot projects we had, yeah? And then we progress more with more knowledge partnership after that, more grants for more cohorts. In terms of fairness, as Bumali mentioned, it's there. Yeah. So what the program is trying to do, we have the intent and the process, the business process that allows these issues to be discussed and transparently shared. Yeah. So we created from the beginning, when we created the call for proposal, there is already mentioned there on what inclusivity is about and what the expectation is. The system of us receiving proposals, it's already allowing everyone considered as partners to able to look at the application, to open the application and look at the budget and what's actually being put in there. And we provided a lot of supports, learning from this case study. Afterwards, we provided more supports on coaching and tools to facilitate the consortium to talk and address the elephants in the room. And sometimes it's not just about funding, but academic issues like co-authorship is also an issue. Yeah, who goes first? Who goes next? Yeah, and there is also in Indonesia there is a government expectation and credit points if the Indonesian researchers is at the first or the second mentioned name in authorship. So there are quite a diverse issue of fairness. And so what we try to do here, create the process and the tools to support these discussions to happen. And so sometimes it doesn't resolve, but hopefully it creates dialogues and produce understanding, resulted in understanding on what happens out there. And we can then progress to hopefully influence improvement from each other, learning from each other aspect.
Thank you to the panel. That was a great question. We've got lots of questions rolling in. I'm just going to take one from the audience and then I'll take one from the app.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's a really great discussion. I just wanted to ask, like I came from an Indigenous land and sea management and research kind of background. So it's interesting, this discussion around relationships and partnerships, and then also funding, how people can be better, fairly involved, I suppose. And I think from our experience, we think that
or what we've found is that there's a lot of what you might call invisible or unseen or unrecognized components to it. And so, you know, time is one aspect where time for relationship building and, you know, building that trust and building the understanding around the research project itself, but also time for adequate decision making. So we recognise a lot about cultural governance and cultural authority when it comes to decision making. And that's often the part that's not recognised by external people or governments or research institutions. And for that to be effective and to set the scene for an effective research project, it often needs time and it often needs funding for the right people who have the cultural authority to come together, for those people to have time to discuss, and for those people to be well informed. And it comes back to IFPEC, you know, the free, prior, informed consent, for them to be very much informed and understand, and also for them to make their decisions based on cultural governance. And so we struggle quite a lot with our research components in the area we engage in, because these are aspects that are very difficult to get recognised in project proponents or project proposals or budgets. And I just wondered, like, is that something that you guys have come across as well? And like, I guess what are the little tricks to get around that? Like, what have you found to get that recognised so that you can adequately work with your partners on the ground for them to do, you know, aspects like that? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe we'll go to Stuart first. Are you keen to dive into partnership and tips and tricks to get around the realities? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Karen, and thank you for the question. A very, very relevant one. Not sure about tips and tricks, but is it an issue that we face? Absolutely, it is, and actually, the case studies also highlighted the importance of the time together, the face-to-face time. I think there was one example that comes to mind from the case studies. We had an Indonesian research team and an Australian research team, and they had furious debates about methodology. And I think what the case study highlighted was it was actually the lunch times. It was the time they spent. So they'd have these debates either online, remotely, but this research grant enabled them to actually spend a bit of time in each other's company. And it was the time that they ate together outside of that sort of the meeting, the governed confines of a meeting space. That had a really profound impact on their ability to work through some of these struggles. And actually that partnership really gained in strength through that. So really furious agreement from me about those issues and the importance of time, and recognizing that. Of course, the cost and the funding is something. We're talking about distances between Australia and Indonesia here. So it is something that we need to work through. I don't know, Pinkan and Marilyn, if you want to add specifically on this, but I do know that the funding issue is key, and getting that recognised. But from my perspective, absolutely agree about the importance of that. Pinkan, I reckon you'd have some very interesting insights on that.
Maybe just a bit in terms of funding, yeah. In our program, and I understand not every program works this way, but specific for this program, we have of course, we have a limited budget available, but there is flexibility included in the process, in a way that in the bucket of funds, we ask for output deliverables. So when output of deliverables are shared, that shows progress of how the research is. But what funds actually use behind these outputs, it was budgeted in the beginning, but how it's actually used in the end can be rather flexible. Yeah, so funds can be reduced in one way, increased in another way. Of course, there's audit involved in the end, but as long as it follows, the good governance, yeah, the institutional policies, so it's not misused. But there is flexibility on in what aspect things need to be adjusted, and it allows people to sometimes change the approach of the research and allows um, more adaptive, yeah, process in the research. We also include reasonable accommodation aspect into the funding. Yeah. There is a specific what do you call it, part, yeah, for reasonable accommodation, noting that the research to be inclusive, research may have to consider other aspects, yeah, beyond academics time, meeting rooms, and so on, yeah. And so we defined it, what's reasonable accommodation means, but it allows additional support to cater this kind of adaptive needs. Yeah. So I think that's maybe not every project would allow reasonable accommodation support, but that's what we do because we mean when we say we wanted an inclusive and impactful research.
I might just add to your question. I think it's a really, really important question that really touches at the heart of what KONEKSI is trying to do. In terms of the GEDSI, beyond us providing research grants and to do this collaborative research, a big part of what we do is to support our GEDSI groups, which are gender equality, disability, and social inclusion. And social inclusion includes all marginalized groups in Indonesia, including our very diverse indigenous groups. And I think it's really important question in terms of what equitable and inclusive research looks like and a big part of our programming is really about making sure that we support those people on the ground with lived experience. And one example we can give is we're supporting our disability network to come up with a guideline that allows our knowledge partner. This is how you work with people with disability as co-researchers, but as well as participants in the community. And I think it's really giving the power back to communities that they will teach us how they want to be engaged if we're wanting to do research with them. And I think this is one of the ways that we need to begin to address some of these inequalities. And absolutely time, reasonable accommodation, it's really an important thing. It largely applies to people with disability. I think reasonable accommodation needs to apply to all groups and needs to be contextual, and time and resources need to be budgeted to make sure that you allow the time and resources allocated for free and informed consent, but also ways of working with different groups. Thank you.
Thanks. And I think Marilyn is getting at a similar angle as me, which was around the consultation of or involvement of different types of research participants and the funding needed for that. Because there were groups that were like farmers, collectives, that would otherwise be working in the fields. There's women's solidarity groups that would otherwise be also engaged. There was children, there was minority customary groups, there was Indigenous groups in West Papua and other areas. And so also thinking about how are they compensated for their time, for their participation in the research. And I think that is a really great innovation that I've seen in the more recent rounds of KONEKSI, that there's money that can be put there in the budget for childcare, for transport, for those incidental costs, which don't add up to a lot, but there are a lot of funders that just don't allow for that. So it's really great to see that contextual reality then translated into the budget structure.
Okay, great. Another wonderful question. The panel, you've spoken about some of the challenges in a complex partnership arrangement. Are there any other challenges you would highlight? And further, for successful partnerships you've done, how do you ensure continuity and to keep the momentum going? So any other challenges and how do you keep that momentum going in successful partnerships?
Who wants to kick off with that? Maybe Pinkan, do you want to start with that one? And then Stuart, and we can go around. Anyone jumping up for joy to answer? Yep, go ahead.
What are the challenges? Okay, I'm in a very positive mood at the moment, so I can't think of additional challenges that what we've discussed today. Someone can jump in. But how to keep the momentums? The way we keep momentums is by meeting a lot. Yeah, we engage our partnerships, our partners through dialogues, a lot of knowledge events. Yeah, and we're now wanting to do more in terms of bringing the community of KONEKSI together. Yeah, so we're going to initiate more. So for the community of KONEKSI to actually learn and connect with each other. But also, because we are the part of the Australian government programs, there are also other mechanisms that Australian government support, and many of those supports platforms allows continuity of relationships and expansion of relationship. Not mentioned in the case study here, but one example is there is a research program that actually use a different government mechanism, New Colombo Plan, to actually invite students to be part of, to take part in the relationship, not so much in doing the research, but actually to take part in the relationship that was open because of the network built through this research. So there are different mechanisms and activities that can be used to continue the momentum. Thank you.
There's a related question in the app here, and it's just about what strategies do you think are effective in maintaining collaboration and partnership even after the project funding ends?
Well, just to recognize that is really a challenge. Like we are constrained by what we are funded for. And so doing publications or continuing to meet after a project ends is hard to justify when there is so many other priorities. So I think some of the strategies that we've used is thinking of achievable ways that we can stay in touch, like around, joint conference presentations, or when either of us is traveling to go and drop into each other's offices and just have a casual catch up. And that's as good as I've got at the moment. Nothing really revolutionary, but perhaps the rest of the panel will have better ideas.
I may, if I may, perhaps offer a couple of thoughts on this, which is something that it's very much a part of it's very live for us, this question of sustaining collaboration beyond the funding windows. This particular round on environment and climate change is almost complete. Some have been extended, but the original projects have almost all completed. So it is something that we're thinking through at the moment. And the reality is, it's as Pinkan called it, the elephants in the room. Funding is the elephant in the room. And KONEKSI was designed with the intention of strengthening, of increasing collaboration between Australian and Indonesian researchers. And the actual outcomes that we're expected to demonstrate or expected to achieve by the end of this program, that is a key one. The collaboration has strengthened between Australian and Indonesian. And so the reality is that, well, if it is the intention to ensure that that collaboration endures, then there needs to be the funding resources in the environment. There needs to be the funding opportunities in the environment to support that. And that means confronting some of the fairness and budget allocation questions that we've already touched on so far. There are different cost structures for Australian researchers than there are in Indonesia. And so I think it's difficult to really have a meaningful discussion about this unless we talk about that. And that's a much bigger question than KONEKSI, which is a bilateral initiative introduced in this space. So I think there's a bigger conversation there about what types of funding are available internationally for collaborative research of this type. And there are others who are much better placed than me to tackle that one, but I think that is such a key thing. And challenges and successes or things behind the success. It's going to sound a bit glib, but it is communication, and we see it again and again. How critical that is, and what we know is that this question about fairness, if there are some unsurfaced perceptions around, for instance, the budget not being fairly allocated, if those things lie below the surface and they're never discussed, well, those are the sorts of things that continue to just corrode the goodwill that led to the partnership being formed in the first place. So having the tough conversations, awkward though they may be, that's such a key factor, I think. And there are many examples, some of which are in the case studies of partners having those conversations and coming out better as a result of that. So that also poses interesting questions for KONEKSI. Where does our role extend to? Are we expected to solve these difficult questions when they come up? I don't think it is our result, but it's not our role. But we are expected to create the space, and we should be held accountable for creating the space for those difficult conversations to take place. So I think that's a key ingredient in giving those partnerships the best chance of success. But the funding is a critical one, and that's a big question. Yeah, back to you, Karen.
Great. I think Marilyn, you wanted to jump in there. Did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, look, I think it's a really, really important question for KONEKSI to consider. And I think just responding, extending from Stu's point, I think there's currently an over-reliance, obviously, on funding, but also I think relying on the relationship of individual researchers with individual researchers to do this sort of thing. And I think a couple of things that KONEKSI is trying to do, anticipating this, is developing a knowledge and partnership hub, which is really a kind of community that hopes to bring to be a home for all the researchers and institutions that are connected, but also much larger, broader Indonesian Australian community. And that's sort of coming in the next few months. But I think the other thing that we sort of learned through partnerships that we've experienced is, I think, just more work needs to be done on an institutional to institutional level, having more institutional at a very local level, small sort of consortiums, having that institutional buy-in to see the value in supporting their researchers and their academics and students in international collaboration. I think would go a long way in terms of even small fundings that each university can contribute to do small research. And it doesn't have to be big scales like the ones that we're supporting. I think, I think we need to spend a little bit more time to be a bit more creative in sustaining this really, really important relationships.
Okay. I might just take one or two more from the app, if that's okay. This one might be for you, Marilyn. So someone in the audience is interested to hear thoughts on how GEDSI principles can be meaningfully integrated into research partnerships. So they're coming from a Melanesian community where cultural identity and traditional practices are so central. What have you experienced in terms of navigating gender roles, disability stigma, and social hierarchies in ways that both respect cultural norms and promote inclusive outcomes?
Really, really great question. Look, I think what we try and do, and this is again back to my point around when you're working with community, this matter where community is that you are dealing with marginalized groups, unavoidable. And I think what we've tried to do is to get researchers right from the start to really reflect on the whole power relation question. I think from a team right down to their research question, their research design, who they're going to interact with in their data collection, how are they going to interact. And I think being really equipped, do your homework, understand the community and all the diverse groups within that community before you even start. Make sure that your research team is well equipped, culturally responsive. And I think that do no harm is not just a concept. It has to be reflected in the way you work. And I think one of the things that we do well in KONEKSI is we have the monitoring visits and we do field work. We have different representation from different units, including GEDSI partnership, really involved in those monitoring visits where we can actually get the experiences of people on the ground, the participants themselves, and we have encountered people telling us that maybe some of those practices were not up to scratch. And I think it is important for us to be able to have those conversations with research teams when those things happen. But I think we try and encourage people to think and to really consider all of these really important questions before they even embark on the research. I think this is obviously a very complex problem, but I think it's something that can't avoid, and we are very committed to tackle it from the beginning. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks, Marilyn. I wanted to comment from Australian perspective that I think that cultural and social awareness is really important amongst Australian students and Australian research institutions. And unfortunately, we're in a dire situation in terms of Indonesian studies and Asian studies more generally. And so over the last year, already different departments cutting their Indonesian language programs. And I think UTAS just got extended by 6 months, trying to get bailed out by the embassy. But a lot of universities are cutting these degrees and courses because of the neoliberal sort of education system that is only valuing certain types of knowledges and claiming to be demand driven, but then not supporting these types of relationships across cultures. So I think, yeah, my call to action would be, if you're here in Australia, like, tell our politicians that we care about our Indonesian neighbor and studies and research. And if you're in Indonesia as well, then build the connections with Australia. And if you're from elsewhere, support humanities as well, because I think it's so critical to these types of ongoing bilateral relationships across many sectors.
Wonderful. Linked to that, there's a question from from the audience. So given the recent funding cuts to aid and research, could you advise how long KONEKSI intends to continue supporting this initiative, or when the current funding cycle is expected to conclude?
Perhaps I can chip in there. So KONEKSI is currently expected to run till the end of 2027. There's obviously in the time between now and 2027, there will be a process within the Australian government in consultation with the Indonesian government to consider the next steps. Beyond that, I'm afraid it's in the hands of the two governments. Yeah.
Okay, great. I think we've just got time for one more question, and perhaps this is a nice way to wrap up. So there's another question just about fairness and equal partnership. So maybe your concluding thoughts on this. We always talk about a fair or equal partnership, but in reality, it's hard to have equal or fair. It's hard to have those. For example, it's a common practice for a partnership being led by a leading partner. Could you please share if you faced any challenges in managing the power dynamics in the partnership and how you overcome those challenges?
I can talk from the case studies that we did. It's often structured differently within these grants that there were co-leads, so one from Australian institution and one from Indonesian, or the Indonesian institution was leading. And I think another way was also to sort of rotate leadership, so having one component or one output within the research project to be led by one researcher, and then another component led by another. Of course, like sharing the knowledge along the way and doing joint analysis too. But yeah, of other types of funding structures I've seen, this one has been more equitable and actually given a lot of opportunities to Indonesian researchers. So hopefully that continues, and also with the joint funding from Indonesian ministries with Australian government, that also encourages that kind of split budget, and the Indonesian partners developing their own budget in rupiah that they submit to the Indonesian assessor of that funding. So going all the ways up that kind of structure.
Okay, great. Any last?
Well, there's one question on the decolonising. I'd be interested. Yeah, maybe we could ask that of the group as well. I think we've got time for that question.
Okay, wonderful. I was nervous Stuart had opened that up as being a big question for the panel. So yes. So the question relates to, in the previous plenary, in what ways has KONEKSI decolonised the development and knowledge structure in practice?
You all nodded. Marilyn, Stuart, Pinkan, you all nodded at once. Who wants to take the lead of that? It's a really important question, and it reflects to our keynote panel. How are we decolonising knowledge? Yeah.
I think I can start. I think because KONEKSI is about partnership, we give equal opportunities for the Indonesian to also lead the projects that we fund. And in a way, it's already decolonized. Yeah? It doesn't go to the usual way where the funder is the lead. Yeah. So we allow equal opportunities there. And the initiative that Tamara mentioned about the co-funding mechanism, it's a new way of development. Yeah? There is a joint funding mechanism, and so there is an equal power relations in a way, and towards development, towards development issues, and towards particular policy issues. So yeah, I think through research we actually allows decolonization. I think. Yeah. Stuart, you may have your own point there?
Thanks, Pinkan. I think one way that comes to mind is, and this is building on a lot of what's already been said, is the opportunities through KONEKSI for local connectedness, for organizations and voices that are closer to the issues that the research is trying to address to meaningfully drive the research. And I think through KONEKSI, the structure of the grants, that's an opportunity that emerges through KONEKSI for resources to support that process. And by having a focus right from the beginning on partnership and on equity and on GEDSI, and seeking to follow that through in all aspects of the way that we support and foster this research, we try to make sure that those voices continue through the research cycle. So perhaps I can offer that perspective. Thank you.
That's great. That's fantastic. Well, we're just at time, and so I think really fantastic conversations that we've had. I thought at one point we're going to have so much time left over, but the time just went really quick in the end, didn't it? It was a fascinating conversation, and we're at lunchtime already. I can't believe how fast it all went. So a huge thanks to Marilyn, Stuart and Pinkan for being online, and for Tamara here. Just to kind of summarize some of the thoughts, it was around we talked about the concepts of fairness, we talked about the concepts of time, moving from the transactional to the relational, the importance of flexibility in funding, and maybe this is a shout out to other funders out there, that we actually equip research teams to do the work. We don't just set the compliance and the metrics, but really equipping researchers to do the work. Magic in diversity. Stuart talked about that value of diversity and that connectedness, which really speaks to the idea of locally led as well, that we don't just have the academic researchers, but we have locally led people being the change agents. Humility of partners, and that we need to recognise that we know stuff, but we don't know a lot of stuff, and we need to listen and learn from each other. Funding, we talked about that, it's kind of the crux of it all, but the question, we don't have the answer yet, but the question of sustaining collaborations beyond these funding windows. And then we also talked about having those tough conversations and the importance of not having those elephants in the room, and as Stuart said, not having those things being issues that corrode the goodwill that starts. So really having those tough conversations. And another sort of question mark we didn't really tackle was those institutional linkages and how to build those institutional linkages long-term beyond the project to project. So one of the things I think is really reflected to the previous panel, and I think it was Salma who basically said it's just about actions. We actually need to act in different ways. And so I think, some of the actions that we've been hearing about today is around acting in different ways, and acting in different ways that really enable those inclusive partnerships. And it's not just buzzwords that sort of go around. It's not easy, it's not complex, it's complex, and it needs those tough conversations. But it was Jackie Adams, It's about actions. Let's stop talking and let's act in different ways. So thank you very much, everyone. Great participation, and you made the time go really quick for me. And thank you to our panelists. And we've got lunch now. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Pinka. Enjoy your lunch. Go out on the terrace and get some vitamin D. And we'll be back in the sessions after lunch. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.